So in this video, we're going to talk about talking. Talking to air traffic control can be pretty intimidating for especially student pilots, but even licensed pilots that just don't deal with air traffic control very often. So what I want to do today is kind of cover the basic flow that you will deal with at a towered airport. Calling ground, eventually tower, if it's Class Charlie airspace, then departure, and then reverse that coming back in. Approach, if it's Class C airspace, and then the tower, and then ground. So that hopefully we can see that radio communications with air traffic control can be pretty predictable. You'll say these things, they'll say things back to you, and there really shouldn't be any surprises. There's going to be a sibling video that I'll put a link to in the comments here that will dive more into one specific area where when we're ready to call tower for permission to take off and the possible responses that you could get back. Again, to show how predictable. You might get one of 5 possible responses back, but typically it is one of those 5. So we're going to cover kind of Class Delta and Charlie scenarios. We're going to go back and forth because there's a lot of similarities. They're both towered airports, Class Delta and Class Charlie, but then there's some subtle differences as well. So very first thing you're going to do obviously is get your weather, whether it's an automated weather or an ATC, which is just a guy in the tower recording the weather along with any other information onto a loop that you listen to. So when you go to call ground, it's going to be pretty much any radio call you're going to make initially is 4 W's. Who you're talking to, who you are, where you are, and what do you want. So we're going to use Owensboro is a Class D airport here in Kentucky. And then I used to teach at Springfield, Illinois, which is a Class C airport. So we're going to bounce back and forth between those. So let's start with just like Class D. So it might be Owensboro ground, Cessna 12345 with current information. If they have an ATIS, you can say with information alpha. If they don't, it's just an AWOS. Where you are, tell them you're at Eagle Flight Academy, you're at the FBO, you're in front of the tower, you're at the fuel farm, wherever you are, and then what you want. This is typically going to be a VFR departure with a on-course heading and altitude. The Class D tower might not care about the altitude so much, but they definitely want to know which way you're going. The Class C ground will be pretty much the same thing. They will definitely want an on-course heading and altitude because you'll eventually be talking to a radar person. Ground will, at a Class D airport, probably just respond back with your taxi instructions. Cessna 12345, taxi to runway 36 via Charlie, cross runway 6, or hold short of runway 6. They have to explicitly clear you across each and every runway. At a Class C airport, they will probably start with reading off to you the departure frequency that you'll eventually get to, and a squawk code, because you do need a transponder in Class C airspace. Then they may even rattle off the taxi instructions right then. Class C ground might wait until you read back the departure frequency and squawk code, and then work out the taxi instructions. Just depends on how busy the controller is. Either way, you will read back everything that they have said. Taxi to runway 36 via Charlie, cross runway 6, or hold short of runway 6, whatever the scenario is. So we're on our way, and we taxi up to, but not onto, our runway we're going to take off on. We've done our run up, we're ready to call tower, and this is where the other video will really dive into a lot of the different scenarios that you can get back from tower, but it's going to be these same 4 W's. Owensboro Tower, Cessna 12345, holding short of runway 36 at Charlie, ready for departure. They'll respond back with one of probably 5 responses. You can see that in the other video. You'll read that back. If they say something extra information, clear for takeoff on runway 36, turn left on course, winds 300 at 10 knots. I don't read back the winds, that's informational. I read back instructions or commands just to make sure we're all on the same page. So you're taking off, and at a Class D airport, that's probably going to be it. Some Class D airports, you just monitor tower as you're heading out of the Class Delta airspace, and then you're done. You can switch to whatever frequency you need. Some Class D towers will want you to report when you have exited the Class Delta airspace. So you need to obviously know where the heck you're at with your little finger on your map as well. At a Class Charlie airspace, or a Class Charlie airport, you will call tower, take off, do your thing, and then at some point the tower will tell you to contact departure on that frequency that the ground controller gave you earlier. So that's a handoff that the tower initiates. The switch from ground to tower, you initiate, because only you know when you're really ready to take off. Tower will hand you off to departure when you're out of his area and he doesn't need to deal with you anymore. So that'll sound something like Cessna 12345, contact departure. Or contact departure on 126.15. They may give you the frequency. If you didn't get it, simply ask, tower, what was that departure frequency? And have them read it back to you again. You'll dial up departure at a Class C departure. You'll dial up departure in your radio, and it's the 4 W's. Who you're talking to, right? Springfield departure, Cessna 12345. For the where you are, tell them the altitude you're at, the word climbing, if you are indeed still climbing, and the target altitude that you said you were going to go to. Let's say you said you were originally going to go to 3,000 feet. So it might be something like Springfield departure, Cessna 12345, 1,500, climbing 3,000. What you want to avoid is 1,500, climbing to 2,500. It's 1,500, 3,500, 3,200. And also try to avoid saying things like, we're climbing to 3,000. Because that TO, climbing to 3,000, sounds an awful lot like TWO. To 3,000. That's 23,000 feet. I'm sure ATC knows your little Cessna isn't going all the way up to 23,000 feet, but it can be just as short and staccato as 1,700, climbing, 3,200. That way they know what the plan is. The radar departure controller hopefully says radar contact, and you're on your way. All right, so let's reverse that coming back in. So we are coming in towards the airport. Subtle differences between a Class D and Class C airspace. Either one, you're going to get the weather ahead of time so that you've got a good plan on the runways that are going to be in use. At a Class C airport, you will call approach first. Springfield approach, Cessna 12345. Where you are, if this is the airport and you're out here to the west and you're flying east, don't say you're east. It's easy to do because you're staring at E on your directional gyro. You say, we're 15 miles to the west, or 20 miles to the west, however far out you are, at whatever altitude you're actually at. And then, finally, the what you want. Tell them, I'm inbound for landing, we're inbound for pattern work, or for touch and goes. And don't forget to tell them the ATIS information you have if that airport does have an ATIS. That could really be a part of either one of these. Probably more the where you are. The Class C approach controller will then give you a squawk code. You'll read it back. You'll dial it in. They may tell you to ident, which means just hit the little ident button on your transponder. You don't even have to verbally respond to that. Just hit it so it lights up on their radar screen. They'll respond back after a couple sweeps of their radar screen. Radar contact, X number of miles from the airport, and then they'll give you some sort of instructions on how to attack the airport. Enter a right base for runway, 13. Enter a right base for runway 22. Enter the downwind for runway 31, the left downwind, the right downwind. And you'll just read that back and then obey whatever that is. At a Class D airport, your first call up inbound will be with the tower. Owensboro Tower, Cessna 12345, 10 miles to the west, landing. Inbound for landing. Inbound for touch and goes. It's whatever you want. The Class D tower will give you some sort of instructions to head into a runway, and then they'll probably say something like report a, if you've got here and you're just going to come in and land on 18, they might say report a 2-mile right base for 18. Well, that means just fly to this base leg. When you're about 2 miles away from it, give them a call. Wake them up. They can look for you with their little binoculars, and then hopefully at that point they'll clear you to land. Report the right downwind for, or was that the left downwind for runway 36. We'll report left downwind for 36, Cessna 345. And you come in and enter the traffic pattern. For the Class C airport, once you get closer, the approach controller will hand you off to the tower. Again, that's a scenario where they initiate the handoff. You don't go to the Class C tower frequency on your own until the approach controller tells you to. When they do, it may be something similar like the Class D tower. You're clear to land. Enter the right base for runway blah, whatever the scenario is. So you come in, you land. And typically when you land, that's right when the tower gives you a big flurry of taxi instructions. Get at least the first one, whatever taxiway you're supposed to exit on. Maybe read that back, get off the runway, get clear of the hold short line, bring it to a stop, then call the tower and ask them to repeat, okay, what were those taxi instructions? They'll read them off to you. And if you manage to catch it right away, you'll turn off on that taxiway. You're still going to bring it to a stop, clean the airplane up, and tower might very well say, remain this frequency to parking, which means you're not going to call ground. Some towered airports do that. Some of them will say, contact ground. So that just depends on the airport that you're coming into. As a shortcut, some airports will say, contact ground on 0.8. 0.8. Okay, 0.8, but what in the world do I put here? That's kind of a shorthand for 121 point whatever. Contact ground on 0.6. 121.6. Generally, most ground frequencies are 121 point something. Not all of them, but that's generally the case. So sometimes they'll use that shorthand. So once you have your taxi instructions from either ground or tower, depending on who you're supposed to be monitoring, you'll read those back and just obey those instructions. It might be something they would say to you, Cessna 12345, taxi to parking via Alpha Bravo Charlie, hold short of runway 31 at Charlie. Taxi to parking via Alpha Bravo Charlie, hold short of 31 at Charlie. And then at some point, when you get closer, you may even get all the way there and have to stop at the hold short line of Charlie and 31. Then they will clear you across. So they have to explicitly clear you across each and every runway between you and wherever it is that you're going. That wasn't always the case, but there's been enough runway incursions over the years that now ground and or tower has to explicitly clear you across each and every one of them. So hopefully that helps. Radio communications with ATC can seem kind of daunting, but it's very predictable. You're going to say these things when you're in this phase of flight. They're going to say things back to you when you're in that phase of flight. And if you're ever in any sort of doubt, just ask, hey, can you say again? Have them repeat it. If you don't understand what it means, not necessarily you didn't hear it, but if you didn't comprehend it, say that in some way. Talk to them. They're people. Sometimes there really is no standard phraseology way to get done what needs to be done. So just talk to them. If you have any questions, comments, or smart remarks, please leave them in the comments. And thanks for watching.